First of all, this is a CommNet fiber trunk. We're going to pretend it's the Verizon one because I don't have a Verizon one. It'd basically be the same thing except you're going to have 12 pairs of fiber rather than 6 like we have here. And you also have power cables coming out. First thing you'll do is with the hybrid trunk on the ground, before you install it on the tower, we have to go through and verify that everything's passing and good so we don't get it up and have to take it down again. You start off with this little guy, which is called the VFL, the Visual Fault Locator. It just sends a red light through the fiber so you know that the fibers connect. In this little pocket in the front of the pouch is an adapter. This goes from SC, which is what this is, down to LC, which is just the smaller fiber. You just pop it on there, pretty simple. Power button's right here and that'll send red light out. So you just start, look at your numbers, which this one starts at 13 for some really weird reason. And you just send light down one side, like this, plug it in. And then on 13, on the other end of the cable, it'll light up red. Now with this one, I actually have to take the cap off and you'll see it coming out. With the Verizon ones, they have white caps on here, and the cap will actually illuminate red, so you won't need to pull caps off or anything. But just go down the line and make sure that each one of these goes over the opposite end. Make sure we're all good there. Okay, now that we've verified that with the VFL everything connects to the number that it says on each side, we're going to go and we're going to set up the microscope. This right here, this icon that says microscope, is only available when the microscope's plugged in. If you don't have it plugged in, it's not there, obviously. So if you're looking for it, just make sure you have the microscope plugged in. Once it's plugged in, we're going to go here, click on microscope. This thing's kind of a pain to get used to. It makes sense once you've used it a little bit. First thing we're going to do is click on that microscope. It brings us in to where we could actually, right now this is a screen that showed the fiber ends if I was plugged into something. First we need to set it up though. First thing we'll do is we'll hit this file button down here, and then in the top right, explore, and on the left hand side here is the list of folders on this unit. And this will be a new site, so we'd make a new folder, go over here to create directory, and then name it. Okay, once you have it named, just go ahead and hit the enter button. Now, that folder, the directory we just made, will now be in this list on the left-hand side. So you want to go down to it, select it, it'll highlight blue. Once it highlights blue, hit the result button. And that is how you select that as where your scopes will be saved. It's retarded how it works, but that's how it works. So now we'll go into the setup, and you can verify right here under files. It says directory is disk/Columbus CommNet. If you didn't set it up right, it would say disk/scope, because that's where it defaults to save all of your scopes to, but then you'd have to go in every time and pull them out of there. So we're going to start here. The naming scheme, I don't actually follow Verizon's because it doesn't make much sense to me. Is what I do. We have location A and location B. And I will do location A as the end of the cable that you're scoping right now, with location B being the opposite end. And then when I go to scope the opposite end of the cable, I'll just flip-flop them here. So for example, is what you're going to be doing most likely with the trunk cable, is going from one OVP box to another OVP. So I would put location A as the shelter OVP or the bottom OVP, and location B is the tower OVP. And then you would go through and you would scope all of your fiber connectors for the bottom. Okay, now once you're done scoping all of your bottom connections, you'd come back in here to set up. Location A would then be tower OVP, and location B would be base OVP. So you would be scoping at A, and B would be the opposite end of the cable. Alright, so to edit these, all we'll do is here we'll click on location A. It's going to bring up a little box that says what was in location A. You got to click on that again. That'll bring up your keyboard where you can go ahead and name it. Just hit the clear to start all over. CommNet sites are a little bit different, so is what I'm doing here is from the baseband unit up to the tower OVP, you would be naming this as bottom OVP to tower OVP or whatever the situation is. I haven't actually looked at the Scottsbluff CDs to know yet. So we're going here from the baseband unit to the tower OVP. That means I'll be scoping the 6, in my case, at the bottom. Over here in file naming is what I do for file naming is the origin ID, which is location A. I don't know why they don't call them that. Is what these little fields here on the right hand side, they populate themselves based on other information that you've put in. So origin ID, I could set this up one time and then all I have to do is go back in and change my location A and location B, and it'll automatically change these when we go to the file naming. So I'm going to go origin ID to end ID, and then I put a dash, and then that's all I put in there. So this is the example file naming shown right below file naming, and you might not be able to read this, but on the video, once you're sitting in front of the JDSU, it'll make a little more sense, I'm sure. But this thing is going to pre-populate every time I hit the save button after I do a scope with BBU-2 tower OVP dash. Now it'll pop up with a save and the keyboard and all that down there, and all I'll do is I'll select right after the dash and then type in whichever number I am doing, which that'll make more sense when I show you that in a bit. Okay, all you should need here is going to be this tip. Unless you're doing the SFPs, you'll have to switch, but so you know how to use this thing, these little knurled rings, you just go ahead and spin that, and that will pull off the tip. This little case has all the tips in it. The two that come down to a pretty small point, this is your LC and your SC for actually scoping the end of a fiber. Okay, and then there are these two here, which are quite a bit bigger. The smaller ones for an LC bulkhead, the bigger ones for an SC bulkhead. Bulkhead being, you know, this piece right here. So this just slips right in there. The other thing you'll use this square one for is looking in the end of an SFP. When you're installing the tips on here, the only tip that makes a difference is going to be this, the one that's square on the outside. The rest are all round, and they just, you slide them on and they spin freely and put the nut and screw it on. But the square one, there's a little key in the bottom of that you line up. I'm sure you'll figure this out on your own, but I'm just going to show you for the hell of it. Okay, for scoping the ends of these, you'll see on the back of this little plug, I'm almost positive the Verizon's the same way, where there's little letters right here. You might not see in the video, but there's an A side and a B side. So I'm starting with 13A, and this is the bottom length of my cable. All you do is you line that tip in there, push it in until you can see on the screen. On this unit here, you've got this big ring, which is your focus ring. The big button will go from high magnification to low magnification. I leave it on low, that way I can see the entire bit of the fiber, so you know if there's big chunks. When you zoom in, you won't see all of it, and there might be big chunks that the picture's not showing, but when you hit save, it will save the low magnification. On one side only, there's this tiny little button. That is the test button and the unfreeze button. So is what we'll do, plug it in. You want to look at that real quick. So you'll see on there, that one's dirty, but I'll just run this real quick anyways. Okay, on the side, there's a little bar. You'll see there's 3 different colors. It goes red, yellow, and green. You want it to be in the green. It does not have to be in the green to run the test. The yellow will still work, but if you're way out of whack and it's all the way down here in the red, when you run the test, you'll see it'll come up a little error message saying the focus level is too low. You just got to click to get out of that. Now, right here, I'm in the freeze mode. It's not automatically updating. If I scroll and zoom and do all that stuff, it won't change. No, it does change the zoom. Anyways, you hit the little tiny little button and it'll go back to the live view, or you can just hit here on the touchscreen. You have the scope in your hand, it's easier, just hit that little button and then that'll go back to live. So you just rotate the little knob until it's in the green, hit the tiny little button, and that'll start testing. Testing takes about 5 seconds and then it'll pop up. This top right corner will tell you right away if you passed or failed. Obviously here we failed in zone B. All these little red dots are the failing spots. Even though all the way out here it's not red, that means it's okay by standards, it would pass. We'd still want to clean it so that's cleaned up a little bit. Once you get way out here, we don't worry about it too much, and I never worry about it, but DJ says we need to be, even though technically it's passing by the specifications. You know how to clean, so I guess I'm not really going to show you that. So now we have showing it's all passing, no problems there, everything's all nice, pretty, and clean. We're going to hit the save button. Pop up with the keyboard, you'll see at the top here it says file name disk / Columbus ComNet. Just verify, at least for the first time or every time you power the unit up, that it is still in the right save location. If it's not, you're just going to have to go back, hit File, Explore, select the folder on the left-hand side, and go back to Results. Results will bring you back to this. Once the keyboard pops up, it'll auto-populate BBU to Tower OBP. So I'm going to go here right before .jpeg. I'm going to select. You can use these buttons, the left and the right buttons, to move your cursor. So just with a little stylus, get close to it. And between the dash and the dot, I am going to name this whatever fiber number it is. You would be starting with 1A. In this case, I have 13. So I'm just going to put 13A and hit enter, or you can either enter on the little keyboard or this center button, and that'll save it. So now that's one down and like 53 to go. Okay, I'm going to show you this real quick. I've never had this happen on any of the Verizon fibers, so you shouldn't have this problem. It's happened a lot with this stuff though. I don't know if you can see in the video here, it might be a little difficult. Try and show you. You can see here how one of the fibers is sticking out more than the other. They always stick out the same as this top one, but when you're in here scoping, when you push it, it stays clicked in. That I can still scope it just fine and I don't run into any problems, but when you go to do your OTDR test, it has issues. All I do is I stick the little fiber thing in there and wiggle it a little bit and it'll come back out. I don't know if there's another way to do it, but I found that works and it's not scratching the fiber or anything, so we shouldn't have any problems there. Okay, I've got a stubborn one here. I'll run through wet cleaning. I assume you've already done it, but just in case. So this one, you always pull out one because this has been sitting in there, and that one's probably all disgusting and dirty. Got a little pen, it's got denatured alcohol in it, or isopropyl alcohol, isopropyl. Put a couple dabs on there, and you always go from wet to dry, and you want to be completely perpendicular. So you see here, it'll be straight up and down. I'm going to pinch the sides of the box so I'm not dragging the cloth with it. You just set it down, go from wet to dry. I'll do that twice. Hopefully it's good now. This one's been a pain. After you wet clean it, do 2 clicks with the clicky pen, and that'll clean off any little contamination, because every time I've ever done wet cleaning, it still has little streaks, but it gets all of the bits and pieces of dust out at least. Okay, so I can't get that one to pass. Wet cleaned it several times, clicky penned it a million times. So right here we've got this little dot, it's failing. Verizon just wants us to save it anyways, label it as fail. We need to submit it in with the closeout, something like that. They also want it printed out showing like this file printed and left on site so they know which one's bad. They also talked about possibly leaving a flash drive. I haven't had a bad one with Verizon, so we shouldn't have this issue. This fiber is just shitty in comparison. So I'll just go in here and I'll name it the fiber that's supposed to be, and then put a dash and fail. That way when Tyler or whoever's looking through it, they know which one it is. Okay, I'm done with the bottom. I'm going to be switched to scoping the top connectors now. So we'll go back in here to setup. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to change location A to being whatever's up top, which in my case is the tower OVP. And then location B would be whatever's at the bottom. Go back to results. That'll bring up my fiber scope again. And then Austin, you want to zoom out? And then I'm going to show you a different way that you can go about this. This is what the JDSU guy actually says to do. I found it's kind of a pain to get the fiber centered all the time, so I never do it, but you could do it. Try it out at least and see if it works for you. Switch over to the LC bulkhead adapter, which is the one that's square on the outside. And then what you'll do is you'll take the fiber you're going to test, put a bulkhead on it. This is stolen out of an OVP. We'll have to order a few in, but you can just go to your Raycat box and steal this one. There's just two little metal clips that you push in with a knife or something, and then you can slide it out. But this way you can just stick it in there. You don't have to be gentle with it and line it and worry about scratching the tip of the fiber being so close to it, because with this one you're actually not even touching the tip of the fiber. It just, this bulkhead lines it up to where it's looking right in there. Now the downside to that is, as you'll see here, just wiggling this makes the fiber on the screen go crazy, and if you don't hold it perfectly still, you can have a hard time getting the test results to pass. When you're doing this with the double bulkhead going into duplex fiber like this, it's not as bad. When you're scoping your patch cables where you have just a single fiber coming out and using a single bulkhead, it's a lot worse, and you actually have to hold it in weird spots just to get this fiber to be in the center, because it'll be all the way to the edge. So if you're running that problem where it's all the way to the edge, just switch back to this thing. I'll run you through here real quick, just scoping and saving one again. So here I'm on 13A for the top, hit the test button. You see I'm in the green there, so we're all good. And it passed. Go to save. Since I'm at the top, the first one here is Tower OVP, that's all automatically filled out obviously. I'll just go right there between the dash and the dot, and this is 13A. Save that, switch to my next fiber, get focus back in. All good, so save. And 13B. Now I'm gonna move and do the rest. Okay. All these are now scoped and cleaned and they're all good, so we're going to go on to the OTDR testing. And again, this is just the hybrid cable on the ground, not installed or anything, and I'd highly suggest you do this in a shop. Luke found out the hard way doing this on site is a pain. He had to set up a tent, it took him like 4 hours, and he finally gave up on one of the connectors. So the things you're going to need, I don't actually have everything, so this might be a little confusing here, but what you're going to be doing is, out of the top of here, there's a little fiber connector. You've got a gray and an orange cap. The orange one is for multi-mode fiber, which we're not doing. Multi-mode fiber is orange, this is yellow. So we are doing single mode almost all the time, might change down the road, but for now, single mode. You open it up, you have two little adapters, or one in each here. These adapters can be flip-flop depending on which kind of a cable you're using. Hopefully by the time you get this, we'll have the correct cables that we need. For the meantime, we have an SC to LC for our launch cable. So these things would need to be swapped in my case, because I need to plug an SC into my single mode. So these little levers pop right up, the adapter pulls out, be gentle with it. Flip flop them here real quick. It'll make sense once you have it in your hand, because I doubt you can see this very clearly in the video. Push it down, push that lever, it locks into place. So now we have an SC adapter on our single mode port. You shouldn't have to force them in very hard, they should pretty much slide. So then I'm going to go ahead and plug my launch cable in, which the launch cable is just a 10-meter long cable. The point of this is same thing basically with the sweep gear, is that cable is so you can actually see your first connector. If you plug directly into the top of it, you're not, on the test, the results that come up, it won't see right here. So we're just adding 10 meters of fiber, so you'll be able to actually see the very first connection. So just take this thing, plug her in, and that's our launch cable. You'll have to scope and clean these, verify. You don't need to actually save the test, but test them to make sure that they're all good and clean. So we will go from this unit into our launch cable. Our launch cable will then plug into your fiber. It is going to shoot up the fiber through the rail to the other end. On the opposite end, typically is what we would do here is we would have another 10-meter length that is LC to LC, and we'd simply take one of these, plug it in here, and do a loop back. And then it'd shoot down back to the bottom again. Right now, all I have are these two cables, so I can't do that. Is what I'm doing right now is I'm testing one side at a time rather than doing the pair. So if you had that third cable is what you would do. Like I said, launch cable go in here, loop back on this end, and then in the opposite, in your B port is where you would plug this. This is, think of it like a sweep load. This green part here is a termination. It just ends at its low reflectance, so you're not going to see spikes at the end. This will basically terminate it. So we'd go in one side, loop back on the far end of the cable, and then come back down into this termination on the other side of this connector here. And I'll get this plugged in and set up. Okay, just to reiterate, this is not what you'll be doing because you'll hopefully have the right cables, and this would actually be over here with loopback. But if you do have to do this, it's the same thing where you wouldn't go transmit to a transmit and receive to a receive. You have to transmit into the receive port. Right here, I am starting with A going into the JDSU, and my load would be on B because A goes to B, if that makes sense. So I would run this test and then I'd swap it and plug into B here and into A here. Now when I save this test, I'm going to call, like for instance here I'm on 13A, so I'd run this test and save it as 13A, go over to B, save it as 13B. When you're doing your full, with the loop back on the far end, you just save it as 13 or whatever your fiber number is. Okay, now that we've got our launch and receive cables plugged into the fiber, I'll show you how to set this up. You're going to be clicking on the third one in from the bottom. These four down here, it's 4 different tests and 2 different modes. So the top is all multi-mode and the bottom is all single mode. We're doing fiber to the antenna, single mode, so you'll click on that one. Okay, so I don't know where I left off, so we're going to start over here. I think I explained this is the one that you hit. Anyways. Brings us to this screen. This is one of the last tests that I did. The things you're going to want to verify real quick, just so we're clear on this. It's going to test at 2 different wavelengths, which is kind of like a frequency. You just think of it like a frequency. It's 1310 and 1550. It'll go through and you're going to see a check mark beside both of them if they pass. If only one has a check mark, that's an issue. It means that if there's a red X, that means that one failed, but the other one passed. It happens a lot, and when that happens, I usually just rerun it. The other check mark you want to make sure is up here in the top right. Make sure there's a green check mark. It'll be a red X if there's any problems. Now, green means good, red means bad, obviously. These little square rectangles across the top are every connection, splice, launch cable starting, launch cable ending, depending on how much stuff you have in the system. Like when you're doing an entire system where you've got your bottom jumper, your trunk cable, your top jumper, and then your loop back at the RRU, going back through everything again, you're going to see, you know, like 12 of these little squares. When it's over a long distance, there will be a little arrow over here. You can scroll to see everything. Underneath it, it's going to tell you the number there is your foot mark. You're always going to see the unit here on your far left. So that would be the JDSU. Little line, and then the first connection is going to start at 0. So that little line is your launch cable coming out of the unit going into your fiber at where it first starts. So 0 on this unit starts right here. This line here is going through my trunk cable to the end. Now in my case, you know, I'm shooting into the bottom and I'm coming out the top. I'm not looping back, which you hopefully won't be doing, so you'll have the right stuff. When you have a loop back cable plugged in here, so what you're going to see is this length here. In my case, I have 175 foot long cable, so I would see 175 foot, and then right around 30 foot or whatever length my loop back is, and then another 175 foot, and then my receive cable last of all. So in my case here, this is the end of my fiber trunk, and this short chunk here is just my my receive cable, my termination, and it's got a foot mark under there. If you click on event view in the top right, the second button down, that event view will tell you what all of these little connectors are. So you just click on them and this says what the unit thinks it is. It's not always right. when you have a lot of connections in there, it says some whacked out things like RRU right in the middle when that's obviously a fiber jumper or something like that. Okay, just a couple little details. These aren't really pertinent to anything for the testing. It's just more of a troubleshooting helper. I wish I had more jumpers to where I could show you more connections in here. It'd make a little bit more sense. But another option you have to go to is the results table. And this is going to tell me every single connector, the distance that it happens, and then the loss and the reflectance of each connector. Reflectance has to be over 35, which that's actually preset into the unit. I have those alarms set. So if it's green, you're good. It'll be red if it fails. But distance is the big one that really helps, because we'll have a lot of cases where if you have a dirty connector, the fiber or the light will actually reflect back and it won't make it all the way through the cable. And so it'll give you some whacked out readings. I've seen some where on a 100-foot trunk cable it's telling me it's 1,000 foot long because it sits there and bounces back and forth. So this sometimes, you'll be able to know approximately how long each jumper and cable is, so you'll see where the lengths don't add up, and that's where your issue is. And this is in extreme cases. Usually this graph will be right about the right length, so it's telling me right now I'm 175 foot, which I know is correct. So if that was red, I would know that my issue was at the far end of my cable. But let's say this told me it was 1,000 foot, that's where I would go back into my results table to see where the lengths don't start adding up to the cable that I have. Okay, now we're going to get into setup really quick. So once we're in this screen, first thing we're going to do is hit the file button. Even though you've already done this on the scope, you have to do it again for the OTDR test. So you hit the file, it brings up the navigation menu. So I can scroll and find the folder that I'm looking for. Okay, there it is. So in my case, I'm doing Columbus ComNet. Click on it, it will highlight blue. That means it's selected, and then just hit results. Results will take me back to this initial screen. I'm going to click on setup to go into setting up my naming, and when I'm in here I can go to file and verify once again that the directory is Columbus ComNet in my case. Say I click on this little white box here. On the right hand side, these are my 3 fiber to the antenna setup, alarms, and file. Those are my different configurations. If I click on here, they go away. If you want to get those back to where you can navigate between them, just click on the top menu bar and it'll bring them back. Otherwise, what you can do is you can cycle through the next button. I find it's easier just to click here, then you know what you're going to click on. The only things that you're going to be changing are going to be in file and an FTTA or FTTA setup. Here in alarms, do not change any of this. This is set up to Verizon specifications. And if you do accidentally change it, it's in that document, the remote radio head mop or whatever. I emailed it to you just a little bit ago. So we'll go into fiber the antenna setup. Our base station ID is where we typically put like the site name. There's really no good way to name all these the way that they have it laid out. So what I'll do here is whatever test I am running is what I put as my base station ID. So in this case we're testing the fiber trunk and it's our pre-test. So I just put fiber trunk pre, enter that in. RRU ID I leave out when I'm doing my trunk testing. The only time I will fill this out is when you're doing your final testing through all of your fiber jumpers. When you go to do that, it already has pre-filled out alpha, beta, and gamma. Fiber number. This is one that you will be changing. So in your case, you're going to be going 1 through 12. You don't need to come back to setup every time you do this, and I'll explain that later. Change fiber number, we leave to no, that way if you test it and it fails, it's not going to automatically advance every time you test, which would get a little annoying. Loopback cable, in your case it will be yes. I have it set up as no right now because I'm not going to be using a loopback cable. So in file, your file naming is what we have this set up as, is your base station ID, which we have currently set at fiber trunk pre. And then this is going to be edited every single time depending on which fiber I'm testing. And lambda is your wavelength. When I run this test, it's going to save The file that it saves will be individual per wavelength. So when I save, it's actually going to create 4 files. It's going to create a PDF for each wavelength, so 2 PDFs, and then it's going to create a SOAR file, which is the file that the JDSU actually knows, and 1 for each wavelength. Okay, so we're going to run a test real quick. I've got it all set up, naming's all right, and locations. So hit the start stop button, you'll see the testing light come up. There's going to be a little bar graph here. So bad to good. This thing only shows up for about 5 seconds. If it's not over here in the good, then you definitely know you have an issue right away. Sometimes even when it's all the way in good, it still will fail, but it's just a good little indicator to know if it's going to pass right away or not. It's 20 seconds a test, and it's going to do 2 tests because you've got 2 different wavelengths. So the first one's done, now it's running the second one. We're good at both of them on that little bar graph. It's not a bar graph, scale graph, I don't know. Okay, here's actually a really good example. We'll see here it is showing me 0 to 175, and that is the dead end of the fiber. My fiber trunk is 175 foot long, but I have a receive cable hooked up to the other end of it, so it should be showing longer. It's also not filling out fiber end and link loss, so I know I have an issue somewhere. Okay, so I have a good example of what a dirty connector will look like. You can see there that red box, which is probably going to go away in just a second. Yes. That red box was bigger than that spike was, which was meaning it's detecting the fiber being longer than, because that spike is the end of my fiber, and it was detecting it as being longer. So I look here, it's showing me fiber end is 300 feet, which I have a 175 foot fiber connector. That's not possible. So what's happening is there's dirt in that connector, it's reflecting back down the cable, basically zigzagging. So it's showing up as longer. Now it's telling me bend detected at 175, which is the end of my fiber. As you can see here, definitely not bent. That coil's normal. It always looks like that, never fails, never tells me that. So that bend detected is actually just dirt. I'm going to go back through and I'll clean it a few times, and best thing to do here would be to pull out your scope again and see how bad it is, and you need to verify that it is clean after you clicky pin it a few more times, so I'm going to do that now. Okay, so I have a passing test here. This is just to show you. It's really goofy. It does this every now and then, but as you can see, there's not a check mark next to 1310. It is showing me a check mark up there, meaning we're all good. For some weird reason, when this happens, you just have to go and hit this trace view button, which will take you to the screen, and then hit it one more time. And then when it comes back, there's a check mark and everything's green and filled out properly. I don't know, I guess if it happens, you just hit that trace view button twice and then it'll clear up and everything looks good. So now that we have a passing test there, we're going to go ahead and save it. To save it, you go to Fast Report. This will bring up the Save All button in the top right, and as you can see here, I have fiber number listed. Now when you're doing a loopback cable and you can test the entire, both A and B at the same time, all you'd have to do is click on this, and you can use the arrow keys here, and that'll advance it, or hit the back key and it'll go down. So you do test 1, you'd hit save all, it'd save the test, set it up for your next cable, cable number 2. You don't need to go into the setup button or anything and change any settings. All you do is run your test, hit the Fast Report button, click on fiber number and change that to 2, and then hit save. Okay, so our fiber number is set up. We're going to go over here to save all. It brings up the keyboard. As you can see here, it's not like the scope, whereas the scope, it would automatically fill out base station ID based on what you entered in setup. Whereas this, it just says base station ID. When you hit the save button, it's going to make a file with what you put in there, but you don't get to see it right now, if that makes any sense. But we do know when we were in setup that we named base station ID as fiber trunk pre, so that'll be automatic. With this being testing A and B separately, is what I'm doing is I am manually entering the fiber number that I'm putting in. is what you would do in your case is in file naming is you would put fiber number in to where, or fiber code, which is that right there. But it'll automatically fill it out for you. So every time, all you would have to do when the screen pops up is hit save and make sure that you changed your fiber number in this screen. So as long as that fiber number was changed, you'd be all good. Okay, so I messed up. Let's try this one more time. I'm going to go ahead and change this real quick. So I just did fiber 14A. Now when I hit enter, you're going to see here in the top, there's two little computers with an arrow talking to each other. You're going to hear 4 beeps. It'll beep once, wait a little bit, 2 beeps, wait a little bit, and beep one last time. That last beep, that goes away. Make sure that you do not do anything until the computer with the arrow goes away. That is meaning that it's writing to the disk. I don't think it would mess anything up if you hit any buttons, but I really don't want to find out. Okay, just to show you real quick, so this makes a little bit more sense. What I was just talking about with you having the fiber number automatically fill out is, in your case, your file naming. When we go into setup and file here, under the file naming field, how I have mine filled out with base station ID, and then the fiber number that I'm working on, because I have a letter in it, I have to manually enter this every time, is what you're going to do is delete that, and you're going to put in fiber code. So it's base station ID dash fiber code and then wavelength. Now under the setup here, as you can see, we have fiber number being 1. That is the field that when you're in the results, let's go back to results, fast report. So that is this fiber number, which you can change on the fly without having to go back to that setup menu. So we would have it set at 1. You would hit save all, if that takes. Now you can see it says fiber code. Now you know fiber code's 1, so we would hit the enter button, save this. I'm not going to because I didn't actually run a test. And then you would switch your fiber, or switch all your jumpers up, run your test. You'd be in this, hit fast report again. Now let's say you're on fiber 2 that you just tested, you just go to 2 and hit save all. And again, this looks the same, but it's going to put number 2 in there instead of number 1, and then just on and on with, up to 12. Once you get done with that, this would still be on your pre-testing on that fiber trunk when it's lying on the ground. Once you get the fiber trunk up on the tower, we're just going to go back into here on your base station ID in the setup, and rather than calling it fiber trunk pre, we're just going to call it fiber trunk, or you can put OVP to OVP. Either way, just so Tyler, I'm sure, is going to be the one naming all this or sending it in, just so he knows that you have your pre-test of the 12, and then you're going to have your trunk test when it's on the tower. So you're going to do those 2 tests, and then you're going to connect all of your fiber jumpers in, and you're going to have a jumper coming from the E node B out to the OVP, and then your fiber trunk going from the bottom OVP to the top OVP, and then a fiber trunk, or the short little fiber jumpers that are individual going from the top OVP out to the RRUs. When you do your final testing, you're going to be inside the shelter with the fiber equipment, plugged in at the E node B fiber, and you're only going to be testing 3 of them since there's only the 3 sectors. So in that case, base station ID is what I've been doing, is just typing system, so we know it's the entire system. RRU ID will have to be changed manually each time. So for your first one, we're going to call it alpha. Alpha's fiber number is obviously 1. And we're going to have to change the file naming as well. So we'll go down to file naming, and it's going to be the base station ID fiber code, and we're just going to have to put in here your RRU ID. So this way it's going to read as, it's going to read as system 1 alpha, and then whatever the wavelength that you're testing at, which it'll make 2 separate files for that. So that's how you're going to do it when you do your entire system. You're also going to have to do scoping on your fiber jumpers, the ones that are running from the top OVP to the RRU. Those will have to be scoped. When I do those, I don't have the scope plugged in, but location A, I would put tower OVP, and location B, I would put RRU, and then I would scope the in that plugs into the OVP box, and then I'd go back and change it up. Location A being RRU, and location B would be tower OVP, and then scope the connectors that plug into the RRU. Lastly, you're going to have to scope all of the SFPs. There are going to be, I believe, a total of 9 or 12 on site. We're only using 6 of them. There'll be 2 per sector, one that goes into the eNode B and one that goes into the RRU. When I name those, I just set location A as being RRU for the RRU ones, and location A would be BBU for the ones that plug into the eNode B, and then I don't put in a location B. That way when you save the file naming, it's just going to say RRU SFP alpha, or whatever you want to name it as. I've just been typing all that in manually rather than having auto file naming set up for it. Okay, now we're down to the last thing, and hopefully I didn't miss anything. Most likely I'm editing this, I'm going to be having to make more video. But after all of your tests are saved, we're going to have to go and pull them off of this unit. At the very top left is your File Explorer. We're going to click on that. That's going to bring up this screen where on the left hand side that's your navigation. As you can see here, we're under disk. I think you'll be able to see that. Yeah. If we scroll down, you can see that I have a USB drive plugged in, USB flash. You can also see the USB icon up here in the top right of the screen. To copy, we are going to select the folder with what you want to pull off. In my case, Columbus ComNet. It's highlighted blue, which means it's selected. Go over here to Edit and hit Copy. It does not do anything. There's no click, there's no beep, there's no feedback at all. Sometimes you'll think you hit it, but it didn't actually copy it. You can hit it a few times if that makes you feel better. But once that's copied, that means that folder has been copied. We're going to scroll down to this flash drive, click on the flash drive. This is going to show me everything in the flash drive, which right now I just have that one file. As you can see up here, it's saying that there's one file and one directory. This, for some reason, does not show folders in this screen, which complicates things a little bit, but we definitely have the flash drive selected down here. It's highlighted blue, so we're going to go over to Paste. And you're going to see that little copy screen at the top. And when the 2 computers that were up here, when those go away, that means it's done copying, and you can verify here. It now says 2 directories, so there's now 2 folders in there. Again, it doesn't show it here, but it added a folder, so we know that the results were now pulled off and on that flash drive. Another way is if you scroll down here, you'll see it says Columbus under the flash drive. Very important on this is to make sure you eject the flash drive before you pull it out. So to do that, you're going to click on Exit, and then there's an Eject USB button. When you hit that, you'll see that USB in the top will change, and it will have a little arrow on it, meaning you can pull it out. So at that point, you can yank the flash drive out, and you're all good. Every one of these things will hopefully, by the time you get it, and they're kind of a pain in the ass to get out. Tiny little SanDisk flash drive, that way it's not sticking out, you're not going to break it off. But hopefully it'll have that in there. We have had a lot of issues. All of my PNY flash drives don't work with this fiber tester for some weird reason. So this one I have verified does work. Hopefully it's in there for you.